August 1945. The air above Tokyo is still heavy with smoke. Concrete streets are cracked and scorched. Steel frames rise like skeletons where factories once stood. The sound of industry, once the heartbeat of an empire, is gone. In its place, silence, and the distant echo of engines that no longer need to fly. Inside government buildings spared by chance rather than defense, Japanese generals sit beneath maps that no longer matter. Lines drawn years earlier, arrows of advance, circles of conquest, have been erased by fire, not by a single weapon, not by one battle, but by a relentless accumulation of force. They had prepared for courage. They had prepared for sacrifice. They had not prepared for volume. Shells that never stopped falling, bombers that returned night after night, fleets that replaced losses faster than they could be counted. This was not defeat by maneuver alone, it was defeat by arithmetic. Reports arrive from every front: Iwo Jima, Okinawa, the Philippine Sea. The language is restrained, formal, disciplined, but the meaning is unmistakable. Japan has not simply lost battles. It has been crushed beneath a scale of firepower no doctrine could absorb. And only now, when resistance is no longer possible, does the full acknowledgement emerge. To understand how Japan's generals reached this conclusion, we must return to the world as it stood before the storm fully broke. December 1941 did not begin with confidence alone. It began with calculation. For Japan's senior military leadership, the decision to go to war against the United States was shaped less by optimism than by narrowing options. By the late 1930s, Imperial Japan was already deeply entangled in China, fighting a grinding continental war that consumed men, fuel, and material at a pace far beyond pre-war planning. The empire's industrial base, modern in parts, fragile in others, was stretched thin. Steel, oil, aluminum, and rubber were finite. Every expansion required more of all four. American embargoes tightened the equation. By mid-1941, U.S. restrictions on aviation fuel and scrap metal had become an existential threat. When oil exports were frozen in July, Japan's Navy calculated its reserves could sustain operations for roughly 18 to 24 months. After that, the fleet would be immobile. For men trained to think in strategic horizons measured in decades, this was a countdown clock. The solution proposed by the Imperial General Headquarters was decisive, violent, and extraordinarily risky. Strike first, seize the resource-rich territories of Southeast Asia, and cripple American naval power long enough to force a negotiated settlement. The United States, Japanese planners believed, lacked the will for a prolonged, casualty-heavy war in the Pacific. This belief did not emerge from ignorance, it came from historical precedent. Japan had defeated China in 1895 and Russia in 1905 by delivering sharp, morale-shattering blows early in the conflict. Western powers, the reasoning went, responded rationally to pain. Apply enough of it quickly and compromise would follow. But there was a flaw embedded in this logic, one that several Japanese officers quietly understood but could not reverse. America's strength was not tactical brilliance alone. It was industrial scale. In 1941, the United States produced nearly two-thirds of the world's oil. Its steel output exceeded that of Germany, Japan, and Italy combined. American shipyards launched vessels not as singular achievements, but as routines. Liberty ships, destroyers, carriers, built in days, not months. For Japan, each carrier was irreplaceable. For the United States, it was a unit in a system. Yet doctrine, culture, and institutional momentum carried Japan forward. The Navy placed faith in the decisive battle concept, a climactic fleet engagement that would shatter American resolve. The Army, dominant within the political structure, remained focused on China and continental Asia, often underestimating the demands of a transoceanic war against an industrial giant. Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, seemed at first to validate Japan's gamble. 8 American battleships damaged or sunk, aircraft destroyed on the ground, the Pacific Fleet temporarily neutralized. In Tokyo, the strike was hailed as proof that daring could overcome disparity. But the numbers told a quieter story. American aircraft carriers were not in port, fuel depots and repair facilities were untouched. Within hours, U.S. shipyards began repair schedules. Within weeks, new construction accelerated. As Japan expanded rapidly across the Pacific, Guam, Wake Island, the Philippines, Malaya, the Dutch East Indies, the illusion of momentum deepened. Victories came quickly. Resistance collapsed in places thought impregnable. Japanese commanders interpreted speed as confirmation that the enemy was unprepared and psychologically brittle. What they could not yet see was that each mile gained lengthened their supply lines. Each island seized required garrisons, air cover, fuel, food, and ammunition. The empire was growing faster than its logistics could support. And beneath the surface of early success, American industry was awakening, not emotionally, but mechanically. Factories shifted to war production with astonishing speed. Automobile plants became aircraft lines. Civilian shipyards became naval arsenals. Training pipelines expanded relentlessly. Where Japan measured losses as tragedies, America measured them as data points to be corrected at scale. The Pacific War was no longer a contest of bravery or initiative alone. It was becoming a confrontation between finite reserves and infinite replacement. The Japanese generals would not fully grasp this reality in 1941 or even in 1942. That realization would come later, on burning islands, beneath collapsing bunkers, and under skies filled not with single waves of aircraft, but with formations so dense they blotted out the horizon. And it is there, on the battlefield itself, that context gives way to consequence. By mid-1942, the war Japan had hoped to end quickly had begun to transform into something far more dangerous. The turning point did not announce itself with surrender or collapse. It arrived quietly, embedded in operational reports and replacement tables. The Battle of Midway in June 1942 cost Japan 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Huryu. Each represented years of construction, specialized crews, and irreplaceable institutional knowledge. More damaging than the hulls was the loss of veteran pilots, men trained through long, selective pipelines that could not be rapidly expanded. For the United States, Midway was a victory. For Japan, it was a wound that never fully healed. American carrier losses were replaced within months. Japanese losses were permanent. The asymmetry was structural, not tactical. Even flawless execution could not close it. As the war shifted south and east, the Pacific became a geography of attrition. Guadalcanal, beginning in August 1942, was the first prolonged test of endurance. What began as a limited American landing turned into a 6-month struggle over a single airfield, Henderson Field, and the seas around it. Japanese forces fought with extraordinary tenacity, launching night attacks, naval bombardments, and repeated reinforcement attempts. But each effort exposed a fatal imbalance. American naval gunfire and air support arrived in increasing volume. Japanese supply convoys, forced to run at night, could deliver men but not heavy equipment or sufficient ammunition. Soldiers went into combat underfed, underarmed, and increasingly isolated. Reports from Guadalcanal reveal a shift in tone among Japanese officers. The language remains disciplined, but concern grows sharper. Artillery shortages are noted. Air losses are described as difficult to replace. Enemy bombardment is described not as precise, but as continuous. The Americans, by contrast, could afford to miss. They compensated with weight, thousands of tons of shells, bombers flying multiple sorties per day, aircraft replaced as quickly as they were lost. What Japanese commanders perceived as wasteful inefficiency was, in fact, a deliberate strategy: overwhelm the battlefield until resistance collapsed. By 1943, the United States had formalized this approach. Island hopping bypassed heavily fortified positions, isolating them instead of destroying them outright. Rabaul, once Japan's most powerful Pacific base, was neutralized through sustained air and naval bombardment without a direct assault. Cut off from resupply, its garrison withered in place. For Japanese generals trained in the concept of honor-bound decisive engagement, this was deeply unsettling. The enemy was refusing the kind of battle they had prepared for. Instead of charging fortified positions, American forces simply erased their strategic value with air power and blockade. Technological disparity widened further. American radar improved night fighting. Proximity fuses increased anti-aircraft lethality. New classes of destroyers, submarines, and escort carriers flooded the theater. Meanwhile, Japan's industrial output struggled to replace even basic losses. Fuel shortages grounded aircraft. Training hours for pilots were cut. Quality declined as quantity failed to rise. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, later known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, made the imbalance undeniable. Japanese carrier aviation, once elite, was virtually annihilated. American pilots reported enemy planes exploding under concentrated fire before they could even reach attack range. Afterward, internal assessments within the Japanese Navy acknowledged what could no longer be concealed. Air power parity was gone, permanently. Yet the war did not end, it intensified. As American forces advanced closer to the Japanese home islands, every engagement increased in scale. More ships, more aircraft, more artillery. What had once been episodic bombardment became routine. Firepower was no longer a supporting element. It was the main instrument of strategy. Japanese generals now faced a battlefield where courage remained abundant, but survival did not. Each island became a demonstration, not of tactical failure, but of mathematical inevitability. And as the front lines crept closer to Japan itself, acknowledgement began to shift from private realization to formal admission. That admission, however, did not come all at once. It emerged through multiple lenses, human, tactical, technological, and moral, each revealing the same conclusion from a different angle. On the ground, the imbalance of firepower was not an abstraction. It was physical, immediate, and unrelenting. Japanese infantry doctrine emphasized discipline, concealment, and shock. Soldiers were trained to endure bombardment and then counterattack with sudden violence. Against earlier 20th century armies, this approach had succeeded. Against American firepower in the Pacific, it became catastrophic. At places like Tarawa in November 1943, Japanese defenders occupied deeply prepared positions, concrete bunkers, log-reinforced trenches, interlocking fields of fire. They expected that such defenses, combined with determination, would extract a terrible price. They were correct. American Marines suffered heavy casualties in the opening hours. But the response was not withdrawal, it was escalation. Naval guns continued firing at point-blank range. Tanks were brought ashore under fire. Engineers advanced with flamethrowers and demolition charges. Air support returned repeatedly, saturating defensive positions with explosives. By the third day, most Japanese defenders were dead, buried in their fortifications. Survivors' accounts and post-battle reports reveal a grim recognition. Bravery no longer altered outcomes. Positions that would once have held for weeks were erased in hours. Even the most disciplined units could not function under constant bombardment. Sleep vanished. Communication failed. Command dissolved into isolated pockets. Japanese officers reported that men were being killed without ever seeing the enemy. The psychological effect was profound. Courage remained, but it could not compensate for exposure. Without artillery of comparable weight, without air cover, infantry became targets rather than fighters. This realization struck hardest among field commanders, men who had trained their soldiers personally and now watched them disappear beneath shellfire. Their reports did not accuse, they stated facts. American firepower was not merely superior, it was decisive before contact. Angle 2, the tactical reality, volume over precision. Tactically, the Pacific War forced a painful reassessment within the Japanese High Command. Japanese planning prized efficiency, ammunition was conserved, fire missions were carefully timed, air sorties were expected to achieve results with minimal expenditure. This approach reflected scarcity as much as philosophy. American tactics inverted this logic. Artillery fired not to conserve shells, but to dominate space. Naval gunfire was prolonged and overwhelming. Bombardments continued until targets ceased to exist, not until resistance appeared broken. At Saipan in June 1944, preparatory bombardments lasted days. Entire ridgelines were reshaped. Cave systems collapsed. Even deeply dug positions were compromised by repeated concussions. Japanese commanders noted that American gunners adjusted rapidly, coordinating with spotters and aircraft to correct fire in near real time. The result was a battlefield stripped of initiative. Movement became nearly impossible in daylight. Reserves could not maneuver without being detected and destroyed. Counterattacks, once a core element of Japanese tactics, became suicidal. After Saipan fell, General Yoshitsugu Sato reported that the enemy's firepower rendered traditional tactics obsolete. This was not a complaint, it was an assessment. The battlefield itself had changed. Firepower had become the terrain. These conclusions would deepen as the war entered its final phase, where technological and leadership realities further reinforced the same lesson. By 1944, Japanese generals increasingly understood that they were not only fighting American soldiers, they were fighting American factories. Every major engagement revealed the same pattern. Losses that crippled Japanese units were absorbed almost invisibly by the United States. Aircraft shot down one week were replaced the next. Ships damaged returned to service. New models appeared mid-war, incorporating lessons learned almost in real time. American technological systems worked together as a single organism. Radar detected incoming aircraft long before visual contact. Fighter direction centers coordinated interceptions. Proximity fuses turned anti-aircraft fire into a lethal curtain. On the ground, bulldozers followed infantry, reshaping terrain faster than defenders could exploit it. Japanese intelligence reports noted these developments with increasing alarm. The issue was not that Japan lacked capable engineers or weapons, it lacked the industrial depth to field them at scale. Advanced designs existed on paper but could not be produced in sufficient numbers. Even when new aircraft entered service, fuel shortages and shortened training cycles reduced their effectiveness. Senior officers privately acknowledged that the war had shifted from combat to production. And in that contest, Japan could not compete. The recognition of defeat by firepower did not arrive uniformly. Some senior leaders clung to hope, believing that American casualties would eventually force negotiation. Others understood that hope itself had become a liability. Admiral Somu Toyoda, among others, recognized by late 1944 that Japan's remaining forces could not stop an invasion, only delay it. Yet the structure of command limited adaptation. Army and Navy rivalry hindered unified strategy. Political constraints prevented honest public acknowledgement. Even as generals recognized the overwhelming nature of American firepower, they were bound to continue fighting. This tension between knowledge and obligation defined Japan's final year of war. American commanders, for their part, understood exactly what they were doing. They did not seek heroics, they sought certainty. The goal was not to outfight Japanese soldiers individually, but to remove their ability to fight at all. Firepower was the means, attrition was the method, time was an ally. Japanese generals saw this clearly by Okinawa in 1945. They described American operations as methodical, patient, and inexorable. The enemy did not rush. It advanced behind walls of steel and fire. At Okinawa, one officer wrote that American forces destroyed positions rather than captured them. This was not a criticism. It was a recognition that the nature of warfare itself had changed. And it was here, amid the longest and bloodiest battle of the Pacific, that acknowledgement hardened into certainty. The moment of reckoning was approaching. February 19, 1945. The island of Iwo Jima wakes under a pall of smoke and fire. American naval guns begin their bombardment hours before the first landings. Battleships, cruisers, and destroyers unleash shells in a continuous torrent. The beach trembles under the concussion. Japanese positions, carved from volcanic rock, were thought impervious to conventional assault. They were not impervious to this. When the first waves of Marines hit the sand, the defenders are already engaged, but the sheer weight of firepower changes the fight. Mortar pits collapse before troops can occupy them. Bunkers that had resisted years of planning shatter. Machine gun nests are silenced not by direct assault, but by endless barrage. Smoke, dust, and screaming shrapnel turn the island into a landscape of chaos. On the command maps in Tokyo and Saipan, generals follow the reports with increasing disbelief. Radio intercepts confirm that resistance persists, but not in any organized form. Ammunition is running low. Reinforcements cannot arrive. The U.S. fleet replenishes its losses in real time. Every effort to respond is met with overwhelming retaliation. Admiral Kurabayashi, commander of Iwo Jima's defenses, had prepared for a protracted fight, intending to inflict maximum casualties to slow the American advance. Yet even his meticulous planning cannot overcome the arithmetic of volume. The American weight of fire, relentless and unceasing, forces defenders into attritional calculations. Every bunker destroyed, every trench flooded with explosives, becomes a physical testament to industrial supremacy. This is the point where private acknowledgement becomes professional certainty. The reports are no longer conjecture or cautious warning. They are the inescapable evidence. Japanese forces, no matter their courage or skill, cannot match the firepower arrayed against them. The battle continues for weeks. Every day, defenders note the disparity. They record every tactical adjustment, every failed counterattack. Each day reinforces a single truth: America's ability to replace losses, concentrate firepower, and sustain operations exceeds what Japan can resist. Courage and discipline remain, but they are now measured against an opponent whose advantage is absolute. The psychological weight of this realization extends beyond Iwo Jima. Across Okinawa, Leyte, and the Mariana Islands, Japanese commanders read similar reports. The enemy does not pause, does not tire, and does not hesitate. Firepower, combined with logistical depth, dictates the tempo of war. And yet there is no sudden surrender. Only the grinding, unavoidable advance of an opponent whose numbers, technology, and industrial might leave no room for negotiation. This is the moment when strategy collides with reality, and the generals finally comprehend the scale of what they face. April 1, 1945. Okinawa, the largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War, begins. For Japanese commanders, the stakes are higher than ever. The island's fortifications are extensive, caves, tunnels, and ridgelines prepared over years. Soldiers are ready to fight to the death. Kamikaze units are on standby, their pilots trained for one-way missions designed to sink the invading fleet. The Americans respond with overwhelming force. Over 1,200 aircraft are deployed, supporting ground operations with continuous sorties. Naval artillery pounds the southern beaches and ridgelines. Infantry, armored units, engineers, each element synchronized to maximize destructive effect. The Japanese call it the storm that never ceases. Reports from the field describe a new reality. Counterattacks, once a hallmark of Japanese tactics, are destroyed before they can form. Reinforcements arriving from other parts of the island are decimated in transit. Ammunition, food, and medical supplies are exhausted. Command nodes are disrupted by artillery and airstrikes. Every defensive innovation, caves, tunnels, decays, prolongs resistance, but cannot change the outcome. Admiral Mitsuru Ushijima and General Isamu Cho, commanding the Okinawa defense, observed the cumulative effect of this firepower. It is no longer about individual battles. It is about sustained, overwhelming pressure. The Americans replace losses almost immediately. The tempo of attack is unrelenting. Japanese units, no matter how disciplined, cannot hold. By mid-April, Japanese reports adopt a starkly different tone than in earlier campaigns. Language once steeped in honor and resolve becomes analytical. Our positions are untenable under continuous bombardment. Troop strength is insufficient to resist prolonged assault. Enemy material superiority dictates engagement outcomes. Kamikaze attacks, designed to break the fleet, inflict damage but cannot alter operational momentum. The sheer volume of American replacements, both ships and pilots, neutralizes these sacrifices. Firepower is no longer a tool, it is the defining condition of the battlefield. The human dimension underscores the tragedy. Soldiers fight with unwavering discipline, yet realize that bravery alone cannot match steel, shells, and aircraft. Civilians trapped in the crossfire experience destruction on an unprecedented scale. Cities burn, supply lines collapse, and morale, already fragile, begins to fracture. In these final battles, the acknowledgement crystallizes. Reports reach Tokyo not as speculation, but as unavoidable truth. Japan cannot match American firepower. Industrial capacity, logistics, and technological superiority have become decisive. Courage, strategy, and tactical ingenuity, while still respected and applied, are insufficient. This moment, Okinawa, Iwo Jima, the Philippines, is the apex of the realization. Japanese generals, once confident in doctrine and morale, finally comprehend that the war is no longer a contest of skill or valor. It is a contest of weight, volume, and endurance. And in this contest, Japan is already overwhelmed. From this point, the path of the conflict narrows inexorably toward the Japanese home islands, where firepower, combined with strategic inevitability, will force the final acknowledgements of defeat. August 6, 1945. Hiroshima, the morning light reveals a city that had pulsed with life, now reduced to smoldering rubble. 3 days later, Nagasaki suffers the same fate. The scale of destruction is instantaneous and total. While the atomic bombs are unprecedented in their effect, they are merely the final demonstration of a principle Japanese generals had already recognized. Sustained, overwhelming firepower determines outcomes in modern warfare. Reports from the front lines prior to the bombings reveal staggering losses. Iwo Jima, 18,000 Japanese dead out of roughly 21,000 defenders. Okinawa, over 110,000 Japanese military casualties, tens of thousands of civilians caught in the crossfire. Ships and aircraft destroyed far exceeded Japanese replacement capacity. Meanwhile, American losses, while significant, were absorbable within an industrial system capable of producing replacements faster than they could be lost. By August 1945, the Imperial General Headquarters convenes its last councils. The language in the official assessments is cautious but clear. Courageous defense and adherence to doctrine were unquestioned, yet the arithmetic of attrition had been decisive. The overwhelming scale of American firepower, artillery, air, naval, and industrial, had rendered further resistance strategically futile. Private notes and diaries of generals, later recovered, convey a rare candor. Admiral Somu Toyoda reflects on the inexorable nature of enemy firepower. General Yoshijiro Umezu notes that attrition had exceeded all forecasts and continued engagement would result in national annihilation. These are not lamentations, they are precise military evaluations. The surrender on August 15 is the culmination of years of observation and combat. Japanese leaders do not admit to moral failure, nor to lack of courage. They acknowledge a battlefield reality, the combination of American technology, industrial capacity, logistics, and coordinated force had created an insurmountable disparity. Firepower, once a supporting factor, had become the decisive instrument. Civilian infrastructure mirrors this truth. Cities are leveled by strategic bombing campaigns. Factories and transportation networks lie in ruins. Even cultural landmarks are destroyed or damaged beyond repair. The totality of loss reinforces what commanders in the field had already noted. Industrialized firepower, when applied relentlessly, dictates not only military outcomes but societal collapse. Across the Pacific, scattered garrisons surrender, some unaware that the war has ended, others realizing that resistance is pointless. Communications lines, interrupted for months, confirm the cessation of hostilities. The patterns of attrition that began with Guadalcanal and Midway conclude with nationwide capitulation. The Japanese military hierarchy now records lessons with painful clarity. Overwhelming firepower cannot be countered by bravery alone, and without industrial parity, even disciplined forces cannot sustain prolonged conflict. This acknowledgement, delayed until the final months, will inform post-war doctrines and the study of modern warfare for generations. The surrender of Japan did not erase the scars of combat, it formalized them. Beyond the numbers, the psychological impact on Japanese commanders was profound. Men who had once measured success by tactical ingenuity now confronted the sobering reality that scale and volume had dictated every major outcome. Reports compiled in the months following August 1945 detail the logistical impossibility of resisting sustained American operations. Ammunition shortages, insufficient fuel, and the inability to replace trained personnel compounded battlefield losses, confirming that firepower, not valor, was the ultimate arbiter. Across the Pacific, countless islands remained littered with remnants of fortifications, destroyed vehicles, and discarded weapons. Soldiers who survived the final campaigns often did so through concealment rather than victory. Diaries and post-war interviews reveal a recurring sentiment. The enemy could destroy any position at will, and individual skill was rendered secondary by overwhelming force. The cumulative effect of sustained bombardment, naval, aerial, and artillery, had created a tactical and moral environment that Japanese commanders could not counter. In Tokyo and other surviving urban centers, generals submitted post-war reports that would later be used to analyze the failure of Japan's strategic assumptions. Admiral Somu Toyoda and General Yoshijiro Umezu, among others, emphasized the mismatch between Japanese doctrine and the reality of American industrialized warfare. Their assessments were clinical. Japan had underestimated not just technological capability, but the systemic capacity to replace losses and maintain operational tempo indefinitely. Civilian suffering reinforced military conclusions. Strategic bombing of major cities, combined with naval blockades and resource deprivation, demonstrated that firepower could extend its influence beyond the battlefield. Urban destruction, disrupted logistics, and food shortages transformed the war into a nationwide experience of attrition, making continued resistance untenable. Historians examining these records identify a common theme. Japanese acknowledgement of defeat by firepower occurred gradually, filtered through months of operational failures and catastrophic engagements. It was not a moment of surrender alone, but a cumulative understanding that courage, training, and strategy could not offset material disadvantage. Firepower had become the decisive measure of modern conflict. The final reports conclude with a consensus that would shape post-war military doctrine. Without industrial parity and sustained technological capacity, even the most disciplined, courageous, and strategically capable army cannot withstand an opponent who can replace losses faster than they are inflicted. This realization, bitter and undeniable, sets the stage for reflection on the broader implications. How modern warfare had evolved, how industrial capacity had become a weapon, and how human valor, while heroic, must contend with the arithmetic of firepower. The story of Japan's final years of the Pacific War is not one of moral failure. It is a study in the relentless arithmetic of modern warfare. Courage, discipline, and tactical brilliance, qualities long celebrated by the Imperial Japanese military, proved insufficient against an opponent whose advantage lay in volume, coordination, and industrial depth. Firepower, when applied relentlessly and with precision, became more than a tool. It became the arbiter of outcomes. Japanese generals, forced to confront this reality, faced a profound professional and existential reckoning. Their reports, diaries, and post-war reflections reveal admiration for the enemy's operational mastery, tempered by the bitter knowledge that no amount of planning or bravery could overcome such disparity. The lesson was unambiguous. In the industrialized 20th century, the scale of production, the ability to sustain operations, and the integration of technology and logistics could determine victory as decisively as any battlefield maneuver. This truth resonates beyond the immediate context of the Pacific War. It informs our understanding of modern conflict, where strategy must account for the material and technological capacity of opponents, not just their tactical skill or morale. It reminds us that human courage, while essential, is always constrained by the limits of supply, technology, and endurance. And yet, even in the shadow of overwhelming firepower, the human dimension remains central. Japanese soldiers and commanders fought with a determination that defies simplification. Their acknowledgement of defeat was not the erasure of valor, it was the recognition of an immutable reality, where bravery met arithmetic and came up short. History, when viewed through this lens, is neither heroics alone nor machines alone. It is the interaction of human will with the material conditions of conflict. The legacy of Japan's generals lies not in surrender, but in their candid acknowledgement of a principle that defines warfare in the modern age. That overwhelming firepower, applied without pause, is a force that shapes strategy, dictates outcomes, and ultimately determines the fate of nations. The Pacific War ended, but its lessons endured. And in the quiet, scarred landscapes of Iwo Jima, Okinawa, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki, the truth remains etched for all who study the relentless calculus of combat.